A trusted voice of truth and light.
God gave me a gift. I shovel well. I shovel very well.
And a rally point for those who've accepted the reality that they are not sheep.
We've got a blind date with destiny.
And it looks like she's ordered the lobster.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there, and welcome to the show. Hey, still on the mend after 2 weeks of fighting to maintain my voice. I know, it's my problem. I'll quit complaining about it. I'm just glad to be here. There is so much going on. There is so much that needs to be said. And by gar, I want to be the one to say it, but I've been fighting against nature here for a little bit. Our show is brought to you by MonticelloCollege.org, as well as the Heather Turner team at Patriot Home Mortgage and LifesavingFood.com. I'm going to have some kind words for each of these sponsors. You can also check out the links to each one of them in the show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com. So, where to begin? There is just so much going on here. Couple of things. If you are seeing the supply chain breakdown, and you'll see it a little bit when you're grocery shopping, depending on where you live. Some people are saying, no, I'm not really seeing empty shelves. Other people are saying, yeah, it's looking like a hillbilly smile. Lots of gaps, and, they're wondering, why is it that some things seem to be in fairly short supply? Others are saying, well, it's a problem of it's the truckers, and it's the Teamsters. We have all these ships sitting off the coast, waiting to be unloaded. And I admit, it's kind of scary from the standpoint that we're headed into winter. Inflation is definitely kicking in. Who knew? You dump $3 or $4 trillion into the economy, and suddenly prices go up. I actually saw one economics professor who was saying, well, it's obvious why this is happening. This is just greedy business owners raising their prices. And I think, oh my goodness, how did you become an economics professor? With that limited understanding of how it works. The more dollars added into the economy, the more the purchasing power of each dollar is watered down. And when you start doing that on the scale of trillions of dollars, quantitative easing to the moon, month after month after month, I believe they've been dropping in, $100 billion, the Federal Reserve System. Yeah, it's gonna make prices go up because you got more dollars chasing the same amounts of goods and services. At any rate, the prices are going up. The quantities are shrinking, so you got shrinkflation, and in some cases, there's a breakdown in the supply chain that's making it very difficult to get things to the store shelves. I wanted to play a little clip for you. This is from ABC News Prime Time. And it's a number of officials at I think it's at L.A. Harbor, being interviewed about why are all these ships sitting out there and what's on these ships. But I want you to listen very closely to what one of the experts in this clip, it's just a very short 38-second clip. Listen to what this expert says about what it's going to take to get things flowing again. Maybe this will surprise you, maybe it won't. Again, this is from ABC News.
What is sitting in all these containers behind us?
Everything.
Longshoremen telling me some of these containers have been sitting here for 6 months, with a shortage of truck drivers to get the goods on the highway and into stores. It's not just making things harder to find, it's making them more expensive.
Today we face an economy that's in transition. And as part of that transition, we are seeing high prices for some of the things that people have to buy. But the reality is that the only way we're going to get to a place where we work through this transition is if everyone in America and everyone around the world gets vaccinated. That's why the president continues to be focused on the idea that we get everyone who can vaccinated in this country.
Okay. Now, I'm not trying to promote a conspiracy theory here, but he just did say, if we want to see this crisis end, we've got to get everybody vaccinated. That legit sounds like they are threatening to hold goods until the people in power with the regulatory power are satisfied with the level of forced vaccinations. I don't know. It's possible. Maybe I'm reading more into it than there is. But that is really disturbing. Because what that would mean is the supply chain crunch that a lot of us are about to get intimately acquainted with as we head into the Christmas season and head into winter, very likely is being done deliberately. I know, that's a chilling thought. Why would they do that? And again, it comes down to, well, because there aren't enough people getting vaccinated. Now, I want to play something else for you, and this is this is a fascinating clip from, I don't remember who put this together, but it's the devolution of COVID vaccine efficacy. And it starts with about 3 clips of Dr. Anthony Fauci telling us how effective the vaccine is. So listen to the statements that he's making here, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about what this video goes on to show.
So now we have 2 vaccines that are really quite effective. The mRNA vaccine, highly effective, extraordinarily efficacious, 94 to 95% for mild to moderate disease, and virtually 100% efficacious, because the real-world effectiveness is even more impressive than the results of the clinical trial.
Okay, and then they start showing headlines. Vaccines are safe. Vaccine said to be powerfully effective. COVID vaccine highly effective. And it's just headline after headline after headline. But something happens over the next minute and a half of this video. They start with the Novavax jab, 100% effective, 100% effective. Headline after headline saying the vaccine is 100% effective. And then suddenly 99%? 97%, 96.7%, 96.6%, 95%, 94%. The number steadily goes down. And by the way, whoever put this to the Hall of the Mountain King, kudos to you. This is really good. Oh, 84%, 82%, 81%. The headlines stated with perfect certainty. 75%, 74% effectiveness, 72%, 70%, 69%. And it just keeps going. 59%, 58%, 57%. Oh, look at this. Now it's down to 50%. 42%, 41%, 39%, 33%. And then we're talking about boosters.
Need another shot. We've got to make sure we clarify that with people. It has nothing to do whether or not it's effective. We know it's highly effective.
Anyway, so when you hear people talking about how, well, you just got to be fully vaccinated because the vaccine is effective, they can say what they want about, the vaccine hesitant and how it's really just a bunch of angry Trumpsters out there, flexing their little puny muscles about how they're mad. Their guy, didn't retain the office after the election last year. Baloney. There are an awful lot of people, and I would include myself among them, who look at this and I see the story that I see being played out over those headlines, and these are mainstream headlines. This is MSM stating this with certainty. Well, here we go. This is 100% effective, 100% effective. And then you watch it over time as that number comes down, down, down. Yeah, there's a story in there. And it's the most trusted, face in America. He's got his own action figure, Dr. Fauci. He's going to save us. But it's very clear something here doesn't add up. Which leads me to wonder, well, why are they pushing so hard then? And I don't have the answer, so I'm not going to tell you, because it's got the nanobots in the vaccine. They got to get them into your bloodstream so that they can track you and manipulate your mind. I don't know what the real reasons are. All I know is somebody is turning up the tyranny hardcore. And that is a huge concern. And it has been all along. And here's the crazy thing about it. People like me, and there were lots of folks out there who vigorously resisted the prospect of, masking up, because it just felt like this is more about control than it is about actually, trying to prevent some kind of illness here. And that desire to stand up against that tyranny wasn't selfishness, and it wasn't just being an ideologue. It was to prevent us from coming to a place where we are right now. The place where we are being told, look, if you want to participate in society, you want to work, you want to buy food, You want to be able to interact in society? You got to take the vaccine. I mean, it's tempting. Look, society wants to excommunicate me if I don't do exactly what they say. I got to admit, I'm kind of tempted to say, well, good. Go ahead. Excommunicate me. Kick me out. I didn't want to hang out with you anyway. But it's putting a lot of people's livelihoods on the line, their mental health obviously on the line. How did we get here? We're going to take a quick look at that when we come back. Actually, we're going to talk first, though, about the moment of decision that every single one of us faces. You think you can avoid it? The answer is no. Every man, woman, and child comes to a moment of decision of whether to go along with something wrong, to sit silent in the face of it, or to walk away from it. We'll be back in just a moment.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
All right, welcome back to the show. You have heard me talking in the last few weeks about growing concerns over emptying store shelves and breakdown in the supply chain. And you've also heard me encouraging you, hey, might be a good time to contact my sponsor, lifesavingfood.com, and get yourself a little bit of padding, a little bit of breathing room in terms of putting away some food storage, something that could be there for a rainy day. And one of the things that I have been very careful to point out is that it's a great time to do this because there is still plenty of supply in terms of freeze-dried and dehydrated foods. And I'm sorry to tell you, but there are starting to be some shortages and some breakdowns in the supply chain there as well. Now, my goal here is not to scare you. Okay, so I'm not trying to fan the flames of fear and, hey, you better do this, you're going to die. But the consequences are catching up. The time to act, the window in which to act and to get yourself prepared, it's not going to stay open indefinitely. Take from that what you will, make of it what you will. What you do with this information is, of course, up to you. But I don't know that it's something that you can safely ignore. And so I would strongly encourage you, if you're going to be making a move on this, might be a good time to do it. Now, here's the good news. My listeners will get a 20% discount. So all you have to do is put in my last name, Hyde, as the coupon code at checkout. Please take advantage of it. If you're already squared away, great. Maybe you've got neighbors or friends or family that could use some help. But just know the shortages are starting to kick in. It's going to become more widespread. Don't be one of the people caught unawares. All right. On that note, let's move along here. So every single one of us has this moment of decision. Every one of us. And you think that you can avoid it. But the truth of the matter is it will come to every man, woman, and child where you have to decide. Am I going to go along with what's happening here? Am I going to, stand against it? Well, the past 20 months have given us a lot of experience in this firsthand. And Thomas Luongo has an excellent article that talks about how it's time for all good men to stop fearing John Galt. Now, yes, this is a reference to Atlas Shrugged, but I think we're rapidly approaching some very strong parallels to Atlas Shrugged. And here's what he has to say. He says, there comes a point in every person's life where they have to reckon with the person in the mirror. Who am I? What do I want? Where am I going? And since the beginning of the COVID 9/11 story, he says, I've watched it break so many people who couldn't answer these basic questions. Have you been in that situation? He says, the fear of the virus uncovered a lot about all of us. But unfortunately for a lot of people, it provoked their inner tyrant. Like last year, during the height of the COVID insanity, he says, after publicly hanging up on an unhinged Lee Stranahan live on Sputnik Radio, This is what he tweeted out. Thomas Luongo said, when you hit someone's existential fear, that's when you uncover their inner tyrant. When something is beyond their capacity to understand, that's when they turn to projecting that fear on other people. And he says that's what was done to justify the lockdown. Now, this wasn't really directed at Lee, but he says it was in some ways. He says the hard investigative journalist of February 2020 turned into a sniveling, state-worshipping baby by late April of last year. And I like the analogy he uses here. I mean, he's calling names here, but the point is his friend's fear of death uncovered his Room 101. That incident, among others, eventually took down his radio show with certified stand-up guy Garland Nixon. But today their show is just a former shadow of itself. A shadow of its former self, rather. Now, Tom Luongo says, I don't know if my action was the catalyst for the changes that came, but he says, I do know after that day, nothing was the same. And he says, the sad truth is that Lee wasn't alone. His collapse was just the most public version I ran into personally. When you buy into fear, he says, you sell your reason. Gone is your skepticism as your world collapses. Your eyes focus on the next step, too afraid to raise them to the horizon. And there is no bigger picture, just the moment. So for months now, we have lived among people being terrorized by a story, not a virus, but a story that told them they are heroes for being afraid and the skeptics are villains. And he says to save ourselves, we just have to give up our humanity and submit to an authority incapable of telling us the truth. Because the truth is, he says, we had very little to actually fear. These are the real villains, the Faucis, the Bidens, the Schwabs, the Psakis, the Trudeaus, and anyone else who still believes they're patter. He says it was never about the disease. It was about control and the real damage being done to our psyches, our bodies, and our communities. Exactly as he was arguing to Lee on the radio 18 months before he hung up on him. They created the fear and then manipulated it into something violent. They preyed on our common decency and humanity, twisting it into something evil, which is now plain for anyone who lifts his eyes off the ground to see. Because vaccine mandates are the ultimate form of state violence, the death penalty notwithstanding. Once they had a large enough segment so terrorized they would rather die than admit they'd been duped, those villains pushed the ultimate Hobson's choice on us: get the vaccine against COVID-19, and you can have your life back. But he says it was never their life to take in the first place. We gave it to them, hoping they weren't as evil as many suspected. And it's amazing how just 1 year after a summer of looting and burning over police brutality against a black man who overdosed on fentanyl, these same people are making excuses for even worse police violence against people walking around in sunshine, unmasked. To them, we are the Untermenschen, the unvaxxed, the unclean. And that makes their violence justified because to them, we're the ones keeping things from getting back to normal. Once the threat from COVID-19 was established, he says rationality should have returned, but it hasn't. Too many people are still stuck in Room 101, wedded to their shame over being duped by villains. And he says they now wish death by COVID on those who refuse to get a shot for a virus that has a defined low probability of killing them and for which multiple therapeutic options are available. If they would just shut up, trust the science, and let doctors practice medicine, life would really return to something close to normal. But he says it's increasingly obvious to enough people that these mandates don't measure up to the threat of the virus. Every day it becomes clearer that this is about their fear of us seizing back the power we gave them. And to save themselves from the COVID, they wish it on us, just like Winston Smith, who looks in the mirror and betrayed his love to serve a master who hates him as much as he hates himself. It doesn't matter if the vaccines are safe and effective or not. He says, I'm not here to argue that. That's your personal choice. Make it as you see fit. No blame, no shame. What's important is that it is no one else's choice. And he says, further, it's not to your personal choice to tell me I can't partake in civil society if I don't get the shot, or, like Joe Rogan, choose a different path to treating COVID than you would. By the way, if you haven't seen Rogan's interview with Sanjay Gupta from CNN, Rogan flat out calls him on the carpet. Why did these MFers lie about me, saying I was taking horse dewormer? There's a clip linked in the article. And Tom Luongo says Winston always had a choice. In 1984, he could choose to face his fear and finally become a man like Joe Rogan, or he can project his fear onto real men and stay in his personal hell for all the world to see. By the way, he uses a thing of Keith Olbermann. Anyway, you have to see the clip. Keith Olbermann, I mean, he literally gets to spittle flinging. Like spit dripping down his chin as he's yelling at the camera unhinged about everybody's afraid of the vaccine. It's sad, but that's legit mental illness you're seeing coming out there.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
All right, welcome back to the show. I'm sharing an article here from Thomas Luongo. This is from LouRockwell.com, one of my favorite resources for wrong thinkers, just in case you're interested. I actually have a whole page on my website, thebryanhydeshow.com, which has great resources for people like you who are more interested in learning about the truth than about just, getting the latest talking points of here's what you should fear, here's who you should hate. And speaking of hatred, there is a video clip that Luongo includes in his article of Keith Olbermann going after Joe Rogan. And when Joe Rogan was calling out, Sanjay Gupta and saying, you guys lied. You lied about me saying I took horse dewormer when in fact I took ivermectin, which was prescribed to me by a doctor. And Sanjay Gupta, there was no mea culpa there. There was no, we're really sorry. That was a crappy thing to do. It was just like, yeah, they shouldn't have done it. What are you going to do? But Joe Rogan asks the question, if they would lie about something like this, then he says, would they lie to us about things like Syria? Which is a good point. The credibility of the mainstream media, already on pretty shaky ground with a lot of people, just got a little more shaky. So Rogan speaks the truth. He takes a lot of hits for it. And, of course, Keith Olbermann, who is just absolutely unhinged, responds. Olbermann tweeted out, hey, Joe Rogan, nice to hear you paused from gargling goat urine or whatever you did instead of overcoming your fear of the vaccine to call me unhinged for pointing out what terrified snowflakes you and your clown car of followers are. And Olbermann just goes off. And I wish I could play this for you, but he's pretty profane. That's just Keith. And I don't mean just, though he says bad words, he's like spittle flinging, like there's spit flying out of his mouth as he's trying to express himself. They're afraid. And he just goes on and on. Tom Luongo says, watching this man's 2 minutes of hate is revealing of everything that's wrong with the COVID story. And he says that same choice is now directly in our path, vaxxed or unvaxxed. Now, this is an unpleasant truth, and this is something not a lot of people want to consider, but COVID is never going away. Neither will the flu, and neither will the common cold or any other virus endemic to the environment. He says life is risk, and it belongs to those willing to face those risks to keep the world from breaking. So cower in fear if you like, but scapegoating the unvaxxed won't save you. He says, I saw this in March 2020, saying we have to be brave and celebrate everyone willing to go to work to make the things we need to treat the sick and protect the healthy. But in a real economy, everyone is an essential worker. And that's because everyone contributes in their small way to the fully functional world that ensures the shelves are stocked, the energy flows, and our meager triumphs over nature's hostility to our presence remain in place. Tom Luongo says, for months now, we've been openly threatened with having our lives taken away because we don't have our party registration papers up to date. We've all wrestled, at least at some level, with our disbelief that things would degrade this badly and this quickly. And then the Olbermensch, Keith Olbermann, tells us we can be friends again after we just get the damn shot. But what he won't admit is that we know he's lying. Keith hates us for the mirror we hold up in front of him. Take a long look. That is the face of shame. Because ideals are judges. Those ideals only shame men capable of admitting it. The rest sink into solipsism and insanity. Now, in Ayn Rand's novel, John Galt built the engine that could change the world, but he refused to give it to the world he lived in. The Obermensches would just use it to perpetuate their power, their evil. Who is John Galt? Tom Luongo says he's that best version of ourselves that knows who we are, what we want, and where we will end up. And he says it's past time we stopped fearing the loss that comes with stating that directly. The strike of the productive and the self-aware Rand is envisioned, is here. The airline pilots and Ubermensch class of people, if there ever is one in this sick, sad world, walked out over the last weekend, taking most of Southwest Airlines staff with them. And the Obermensches are furious, openly lying about what happened and castigating anyone who says otherwise. It was weather. It was weather. And we're supposed to pretend, yeah, they're right, it was just weather. That couldn't have anything to do with people being forced to undergo a medical procedure they didn't want. But Tom Luongo says we shouldn't care. Just like we shouldn't care that Sanjay Gupta, after Rogan's shaming, was forced into a public struggle session to retain his place at CNN, proving to all the world that he is a man without principles, ideals, or shame. Tom Luongo says, as I write this on October 15th, vaccine mandates go into effect all around the Davos-controlled world. And the choice is now in front of hundreds of millions of people. Becoming your own version of John Galt comes with loss. It means giving up something today to retain not just your integrity, but to provide strength to those not quite there yet. Everything rests on giving them your consent. The Obermensches do not negotiate. They bully. But Tom Luongo reminds us bullies are cowards. And your consent today feeds their addiction to fear. Now, here's an interesting thing. He's taken this up a notch and saying, previously I've told you quietly, just say no to them. Now he says, I'm telling you, that takes the form of withdrawing consent completely. Risking today's comfort for tomorrow's benefit. The strength you display today is the foundation of a world we build back better than the one is gone. And Tom Luongo says, I had a good gig with Sputnik Radio, but I owed them nothing. But he said when the mask of civility fell, it was time to go. And he says we all wear that mask at times, but only with those worthy of reciprocating. So all things come to an end, good and bad. What matters is who we choose to be, what we want, and unafraid of where those choices lead us. That's a pretty good pep talk. I rather like it, and I think he's on the right path here. I mean, I a good friend of mine and a longtime listener said, well, I've missed you as you've been struggling with laryngitis. He says, who else is going to tell us how the world's on fire? And I'm like, guilty. Yeah, I'm talking about stuff that I know for a lot of people is uncomfortable because these are some very uncomfortable truths. And the only thing I can offer in my defense is, yes, it's true. Some of the stuff that I'm sharing with you on a daily basis is hard to face. It's hard to face for me. And supposedly, that's my job. That's what I do. But it's hard to face because it means that we're going to have to acknowledge that the comfort and the prosperity and the ease of life that we enjoyed, at least for a time, is gone. That doesn't mean we're always going to live in some kind of abject, terror or otherwise, servitude. But what we had before has shifted. And what we have now is different. And different is very uncomfortable for a lot of people. Look at the people who are having to choose between their job and undergoing a medical procedure that they do not want. Some people just feel like they don't have the option of refusing the jab. And I feel a duty, insofar as I can, to be there for those people, to support them. If I can't support them financially, at least morally and spiritually, I can support them. But they're putting very real things on the line. They're putting their livelihood. They're putting their reputations. And the thoughtless crowd is very eager, to pick up the stones that they're going to give them a good public stoning with. This is one of those times where if you're going to be a person of principle, you're going to have to be courageous. There is no other way. You've got to be courageous about how you do it, and that means we've got to be able to recognize tyranny for what it is and to refuse to participate in it. It's not a matter of, get your guns, get your torches, get your pitchforks. We're going to go fight the tyranny, and we're not to that stage. But one of the best ways you can fight it is to withdraw your consent. I'm going to use the word secession. I know that gets some people a little bit anxious. Oh, don't go there. But you got to be willing to secede from polite society. I mean, what are the other choices? You go along with it wholeheartedly? Yeah. I'm going to join in here. Look, I got my little red book just like everybody else. I'm going to show everybody that I'm part of the party faithful. I think most people just choose to be quiet. I'm going to be very, very quiet. I'm going to just slip around here in the shadows. I'm going to try and hide in the crowd and make sure nobody sees me and calls me out or anything. But that still allows that injustice to move forward. We need the John Galts who are willing to say what is truth and withdraw themselves from those things that they cannot reconcile with their own consciences. I wish you the best of luck on that.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
All right, welcome back to the show. Just a quick shout out here to the Heather Turner team at Patriot Home Mortgage in St. George, Utah. If you're one of the thousands of people relocating to the Intermountain West, and particularly if you land in the great state of Utah, you'll want to get in touch with the Heather Turner team at Patriot Home Mortgage. Call her at 435-703-4522. Stop by their office at 619 South Bluff Street in St. George. Heather's NMLS ID is 715386, and Patriot Home Mortgage is an equal housing opportunity lender. Let's talk about tyranny. Not that this is my favorite subject, but would you recognize it if it came calling? See, I'm thinking that this is one of those things where a lot of people say, well, I think I would know tyranny if it was staring me in the face. But not everybody. Jeffrey Tucker has a marvelous primer on the truth about tyranny and how the force that drives tyranny isn't always some dictator. I mean, wouldn't it be easier for us if it was? If tyranny was synonymous with some goose-stepping little dictator with a funny mustache, I mean, we could all recognize it and call it for what it is. Oh, yeah, that's definitely tyranny. But the truth of the matter is, authentic tyranny more often comes at the hands of our neighbors, our coworkers, our family, and our friends. Jeffrey Tucker says, in the simple model of tyranny we learned as school kids, there's a bad guy on top, or perhaps several because he needs advisors, and there's everyone else suffering under his yoke. And the job of freedom is to overthrow the powerful bad guy and set everyone free. Now, Jeffrey Tucker says, I say the simple model, but I'm pretty sure that I believed this all my life. And there's more than a grain of truth in this. The biggest conflicts in world history always pit the government against the people. And this is for the simple reason long highlighted by the liberal tradition. Government uniquely enjoys the legal privilege of threatening and imposing violence, and that power is subject to abuse. But he says there's more going on here. He says, I recall reading the Black Book of Communism when it came out in 1999, and the chapter on China I found most riveting. It described the terrifying force called the Red Guard. It was what we today call a non-government organization, terrorists, more precisely. They were more convinced of Mao's teachings than Mao himself. They were blinded by red ideology, they were prepared to kill for it, and they did. Many millions died. In fact, it's reported even Mao himself was alarmed at their ferocity, which contributed to mass famine and eventually cannibalism. But he wasn't so alarmed as to put a stop to it. Mao's teachings had unleashed hell. He had to light the match, but the fuel that kept it raging came from below as neighbors turned on neighbors and families tore themselves apart. People competed with each other to see how much terror and how much oppression they could inflict on each other in the name of building communism and being loyal to the party. Now, Jeffrey Tucker says, look, I thought, okay, surely this is a cultural habit unique to China. Something to do with the collectivist conformist mindset. We know little to nothing about that in the West because we celebrate individualism and we're suspicious of power. We don't join mobs. We don't find meaning in conformity. We don't inflict violence on each other out of choice. Such an example of grassroots tyranny cannot be found in our civilization, or so I believed. But Jeff Tucker says during this pandemic period, we've found out otherwise. It all began in March of 2020 when millions of Americans were recruited into the ranks of what I used to jokingly call Corona Justice Warriors. They were our flagellants, hilarious in their garb and their maudlin sufferings. Over time, they became less of a joke and more of a threat. They began by policing our communities for mask wearing. They would hang around the grocery stores and yell at people for walking in the wrong direction. They would denounce you for standing too close to others. Tucker says, initially I had assumed the nation would rise up against stay-at-home orders, church and school closures, and the discriminatory shutdowns on business that privilege big-box retailers over local merchants. But he says, I was wrong. Governments were able to recruit multitudes into the ranks of the irrational. Fear made people compliant. That compliance turned many people into champions of their own plight and lustful for mass conformity with the new despotism. And he says, it was a weird time, but it's hardly over. Just yesterday, he says, for instance, I wanted to help a person struggling up the stairs with a big box. She was heavily masked. I tried to help, but her eyes burned through me with fire. She shook her head right and left. I tried again, and she jumped back in anger. Okay, I guess my little act of generosity is not appreciated here. So I stepped away, and she went back to struggling by herself, happier in her plight than in taking the risk of having me infect her or something. Now, he says all these examples sound a bit petty, but actually the impulse behind these actions are much more threatening. They're tearing the country apart, and with the president's encouragement. With each speech, Biden looks for and finds scapegoats for public consumption. First it was the South, then the red states, and then the virus migrated, so he turned on the unvaccinated. Now he demonizes those who don't want it and encourages everyone else to do the same. The unvaxxed are the enemy, in exactly the way that philosopher Carl Schmitt said that eneminess is supposed to work. An arbitrary assignment of malice as a means of intensifying political power through social division. This is the essence of politics. It's conflict, contention, suffering, not social peace and prosperity that give life meaning. Now, Jeffrey Tucker says any regime that wants to stay in power needs to know this secret to hegemony. The desire to cleanse society of the enemy is what compels compliance. Every tyranny in history has depended on recruits to its own ranks from within the culture. And they believe the lie, knowing full well it is a lie. The lie allows them to participate in the purge. They become the willing executioners. And it's been true throughout history, regardless of the particular and shifting desiderata of the despotism of the moment. The cultural impulse behind the demonization of the unvaccinated is essentially puritanical. We have to get rid of unclean things and people. This is why we hear of the unvaccinated being turned away from hospitals, and why there's near silence on the part of the media for the cruelty of their firings. Vaccination has come to serve as proxy for political loyalty, just like masking did last year. Holding the wrong political ideology makes you unclean. You should be purged. That's why the Biden administration is also not concerned about mass firings. They help to purify the country of recalcitrants. It's a Maoist impulse. And Biden has his own Red Guard. That's the Karens screaming on Twitter and in stores and wearing masks alone in cars. They are the grassroots tyrants. Historian Will Durant wrote, "There is always in any society a minority whose instincts rejoice in the permission to persecute. It is a release from civilization." And Jeffrey Tucker says he's right. It's the Joker. It's the Red Guard. It's the malcontents looking for some meaning to their miserable lives, and they think they found it in the persecution of others. Government benefits from this and unleashes the lust for the imposition of pain. The sadistic impulse spreads and spreads, threatening civilization itself. Hannah Arendt, in The Origins of Totalitarianism, offered the most prescient analysis, and some of her points are easily identified in our current environment. Quote, "In an ever-changing, incomprehensible world, the masses had reached the point where they would, at the same time, believe everything and nothing, think that everything was possible and that nothing was true. Mass propaganda discovered that its audience was ready at all times to believe the worst, no matter how absurd, and did not particularly object to being deceived because it held every statement to be a lie anyhow. The totalitarian mass leaders based their propaganda on the correct psychological assumption that under such conditions, one could make people believe the most fantastic statements one day and trust that if the next day they were given irrefutable proof of their falsehood, they would take refuge in cynicism. Instead of deserting the leaders who had lied to them, they would protest that they'd known all along the statement was a lie and that they admired their leaders for their superior tactical cleverness." End quote. Now, Jeff Tucker says the turning point comes when people believe the lie, knowing full well that it is a lie. Morality, truth, and facts no longer carry cultural weight. No one is truly safe in this world. Humor, for example, is out of the question in the midst of social, cultural, and political cleansing. Dissent in general is dangerous. The intensification of cancel culture in the midst of this crisis, it's not accidental. It's all part of the bloodlust that is unleashed in a world consumed by hyper-politicization and the generalized rejection of the liberal spirit. Now, there's more to this article, but I'm going to encourage you. Click on the link, which you will find in the show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com, and check it out for yourself. I strongly recommend subscribe to the Brownstone Institute. Jeffrey Tucker, I believe, is the editor-in-chief over there. Their information is very good. It's very principled. And it's a breath of fresh air in an otherwise fearful and distorted world.
This is The Bryan Hyde Show.